But the title this morning of my message is How to Cross Over. And you've heard our story. Most of you have heard our story over the past few years. I shared back in February when we came back a little bit of our story while we were in Georgia and just that feeling like we were in a desert season. But I want to take you to that next step this morning because you're not called to stay in the desert. You're called to cross over. And I don't know where you're at. I don't know, you might be here with a big vision and you don't know how to get to the other side. You might not have a vision this morning. You might be in a desert place this morning. But God is calling you this morning to cross over. He's calling you this morning to be able to see what's on the other side of the river, to see the bank that's on the other side and to confront the body of water that's separating you and your destiny. There's three main points I want to make this morning, and I'll give you those three and then I'll break it down. But those three main points, number one, in order to cross over, you must have a vision. Number two, you must follow someone who has a vision. And number three, you have to have some fight in you. So if we look at that first one, you must have a vision. I can't stress enough how important it is to have a vision. And you've heard that. We hear that a lot here. The importance of having a vision for your life. It's what carries you along. Even in the midst of a desert, in the middle of a desert, if you still have a vision, that vision will keep you moving. That vision is what stirs that fight in you not to give up. When we've had those times in our lives, and I'm sure pastors will tell you if they've had those times in their lives when it would be easier to give up, it was a vision that kept them moving forward. It was a vision that kept them, even in a desert season, kept you moving towards the exit. Proverbs 29:18 says, "Where there is no vision, the people perish." And in the Message version, it says, if people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves. But when they attend to what He reveals, they are most blessed. And if you study that word vision in the proper translation of that, it literally means a prophetic vision or the revelation that a prophet receives. It's not just a vision. There's a difference between natural vision and prophetic vision. Okay, natural vision, I can easily see my calling or what I'm supposed to do in the natural. But prophetic vision requires spiritual sight. So there's a difference between having those two visions. And this passage is referring to having a prophetic vision. So without a prophetic vision, the people perish. You have to have revelation. You have to be able to see in the spirit of what you're called to do. When you have a prophetic vision of your future, that's what keeps you moving ahead. That's why this church is so much into the prophetic and the importance of the prophetic. It's not just something to make us feel good or give us a good word that we can sit on. It's something to propel you and give you something to confirm your future and keep you moving forward. It's important that you're connected with prophetic people. And it's important, you have to have your own prophetic vision, but it's important that you're connected with prophetic people that speak into that. A prophetic vision and connection with the prophetic is what keeps you moving forward. I'm sure, again, if you were to ask pastors if those times you've heard stories of times in their ministry when things might have got tough, they would tell you what kept them moving forward was a prophetic vision and connection with prophetic people. That's what kept them moving forward. I gave an example. I can't remember if it was our first Sunday back or when I preached, maybe both. Many of you know who Steve Schultz is. He runs the Elijah List, and through getting connected with them writing, we were able to build a connection and a relationship with him. And you know, when we were in Georgia, it was not long, I guess a year before we decided to move back. I was just in that place of, you know, if this is what ministry is, I don't want it, was the place I was at. really in a desert season, a giving up time. He didn't know our story. We'd never shared our story with him. He's connected with so many people. He'd have no way of knowing our story. It was a Sunday afternoon, and he shot me. It wasn't even a spoken word. It was in an email. And that prophetic word, he spoke stuff that he'd have no clue of knowing these details. But that prophetic word ignited and stirred, it revived the prophetic vision that I had, even though I wasn't paying attention to it. It revived a prophetic vision that launched us forward. That simple email broke those 2 or 3 years of that desert season completely off in us. So prophetic vision combined with prophetic connections is what keeps you moving forward. When you have no prophetic sight or prophetic revelation of your future, you stumble all over yourself because you're constantly chasing your own natural vision and your natural desires. So how do you see when you feel like your vision is blinded? Psalms 146 verse 8 says, "The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are weighed down. The Lord loves the godly." Notice who opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord does. So when you feel blinded, He's the one that will open your eyes. This passage is referring to spiritual blindness. Though He's capable of opening physical blindness, this is referring to spiritual blindness. So we first have to submit ourselves completely to the Lord and ask Him to open our eyes, to make our sight clear, because He is the one who removes blindness. You get with leadership, you get with spiritual people, you get with prophetic people that can speak into your life, that can help you with that prophetic vision. Seeing spiritually is having faith. You have to see through the eyes of faith. The Bible says we walk by faith, not by sight. Now that might sound like I'm contradicting myself because I'm saying you've got to have a vision and you've got to see. But I'm talking about a spiritual vision. You're going to see through faith as you apply faith to that prophetic revelation. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Faith is what gives you clear spiritual vision. The vision God will give you is not something you will see in the natural. You will see it in the spiritual, and it requires faith to walk in it. Most of you will find out, if you don't know what your calling is, you will find out. And if you know what your calling is, you can say that this is true, that most of us, what we're called to do is beyond our natural abilities. I shared this we had a prophetic team meeting a few weeks ago, and the call on my life to the prophetic is beyond my natural ability, is beyond what my personality even is. My personality is the furthest from spontaneous as you'll find. I'm not a spontaneous person. I'm a planner. I like to put things in order. I like to plan ahead. I like to know my next step. But a prophetic call, prophetic gift requires you to be a little bit spontaneous. It kind of feels like you're shooting from the hip sometimes. So you'll find that what God has called you to do takes you out of your natural abilities and requires you to operate in faith and to walk solely on faith. Whatever God has for you is beyond your natural abilities, and you can't see it in the natural. You will only see in the natural what you're capable of doing in the natural, in your own ability. So this is why we need to submit ourselves to the Lord. We need to get alone with Him. We need to get around visionaries. You need to get around prophetic people. You need to get around people that can see the bank on the other side of the river. That they're not just focused on the desert and they're not just focused on the body of water, but they see the bank on the other side of the river. So when you feel like you're blinded, when you feel like you don't have a vision, it's time to let God remove those blinders. It's time to activate your faith and ask God to remove the blinders. Miles Monroe teaches in a lot of his books, if you struggle with your purpose and your vision, And you say, well, I just don't know I don't know God's purpose. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. One of the things he tells you to do, he asks a question. What problem in the world is there that you want to fix? Is there a problem in society that you have a passion and desire to fix this problem? That's probably connected to your calling and your vision, because God has given you a passion to do something about it. So step one, in order to cross over, you must have a vision. Step two, to cross over, you must follow someone who has a vision. I believe everybody has leadership capabilities. We all have the ability to lead on different levels. But in order to, even though you're leading, you might be in a high leadership position. You could be the top person in a company, but you still have to follow someone who has a vision. Turn to Joshua chapter 3. I'm going to read verses 6 through 8 and then skip to verse 13. So Joshua 3, 6 through 8 and 13. And this is in the NLT. It says, "In the morning Joshua said to the priests, 'Lift up the ark of the covenant and lead the people across the river.' And so they started out and went ahead of the people. The Lord told Joshua, 'Today I will begin to make you a great leader in the eyes of all the Israelites. They will know that I am with you, just as I was with Moses. Give this command to the priests who carry the ark of the covenant. When you reach the banks of the Jordan River, take a few steps into the river and stop there.' Then verse 13 says, 'The priests will carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand up like a wall.'" If you continue to read and if you study this, you will find that this occurred in the time of year when typically the Jordan River was at its highest. So it wasn't something, some people will argue, well, they probably actually waded across. It wasn't really dry. I've heard those arguments. But it was the time of the year where the only way to get across outside of a boat would have been to swim. It was at its highest levels. And if you read the scripture gives the idea that when they stepped in, the entire river parted ahead of them. The entire river. But if you study and if you read, and it can't be proven, so go with me on this. If you study what the scholars have studied with this, they will tell you that it didn't actually part across the whole way. It parted every time they took a step. So the water would only part in front of them after every step. So they'd step and they'd take another step and the water would part. At each step, the water parted. And I want you to notice who the Lord instructed to go first. He instructed the priests. Those responsible to carry the ark went first. The water parted in front of them, and everybody followed behind them. And then down further, if you were to read more, you found that the priest, as the water parted, and it stayed parted behind them so everybody could cross, they stood in the river, and they stood there. So the water stayed parted until everyone got to the other side. What I'm trying to say is, in order to cross over, you've got to get behind someone who has a vision. If this is your church, or if you're visiting, if this isn't your church and you have another pastor, your pastors, your leadership, to cross over, you have to get behind their vision. And as they cross over, as they take a step and the waters part for them, they're going to part for you. As their vision is fulfilled, your vision is fulfilled. Your vision might be different than theirs. It might look different, but it's still tied together. It all links together. It's all part of the same. They all had the same vision. Every one of them had the same vision, to get to the other side. Some might have had different ideas. Some might have said, well, if I went this way, I could probably get across a little quicker. I might not get as wet. Don't take any chance of drowning. And if you study that also, I was reading about it, they said that the part of the river that they crossed was the worst part of the river to cross. There was actually easier parts, as history shows, during that time of year. There was parts they could have went up further and basically got around and across by just waiting. But they went across the deepest part of the water, the widest part of the river, because they did what they were instructed to do. And it would be easy to say, well, I think it might be easier if I just step out and go this way and sneak around, and I'll just get over there in front of them on the other side, and I won't get as wet. But God has called us to follow a vision, and as the waters part for the church, for our pastors, for leadership, the waters are going to part for you. Many of you were here when Dennis Kramer was here, and he spoke about, he said, the next 4 to 5 years is fulfilling a vision. And Kristen and I decided to come back before we heard Dennis Kramer's word. But what the Lord spoke to us was to go back to help them fulfill their vision. That was the purpose God gave us. And we have to constantly remind ourselves, like anybody, you've got a vision of your own and you think, well, I know what God's called me to do, but God said, go back and do whatever you can to help that church and to help that ministry fulfill their vision. We understand that as we help someone fulfill their vision, our vision is fulfilled. As they walk across, you walk across. Everybody gets to the other side. Everybody gets to the bank on the other side of the river. I want to give you an example of this in my own life. I work from home for the same company I was working for in Georgia. I'm an estimator for a large construction company. When I started working for that company, I had a vision of my own, and there were 3 things. Number 1 was be the most productive estimator that company's got. Number 2 was be promoted within the company. And then once we decided to move, that third thing was to be able to work from home and provide good, solid jobs in the construction industry for the people of Northern Maine. Because I've worked in construction up here, and it's tough. Winters are tough up here. It's not like it is in the South where things just go smoothly year-round. But I purposed from day one that my purpose working for that company was to help that owner fulfill his vision. What can I do to help you fulfill your vision? And I can stand here today and tell you that every one of those goals that was part of my vision are now reality. Because my sole purpose was, what can I do to help you fulfill your vision? As I walked close to him, to the owner of the company, doing what I'm called to do there at that company, as the water parted for him, the water has parted for me. So the attitude we need to have with, again, if this is your home church or whatever your home church is, what can I do to help you fulfill your vision? You might say, well, that part of their vision or passion isn't really the same as mine. I kind of have this, and that's all right. It's all connected. It's all connected. If you have a passion to do something, and Pastor didn't ask me to preach this morning. I just want you to know that. This is what's been on my heart. If you've got a passion to do something, but you say, well, nothing really fits my passion, go to them. Say, what do you think about this? I've really got a passion to do this or to do that. You might be surprised. They might say, we've been waiting for somebody to come along and say, we want to do this or we want to do that. Your passion, your destiny, is directly tied to theirs and the vision of this church. It's all connected together. As you take that step, as they lead the way, the water's going to not just part for them, the water's going to part for you. Don't try to get ahead of the game. Don't try to pass. Don't try to find an easier route, as I mentioned earlier. Follow confidently and follow directly behind. You need to have an attitude of, what's my place in that? You're a staff member of Celebration Center. That's your attitude. That needs to be the attitude of the church as a whole. If someone was to say, Pastor, how many staff members do you have? Well, I've got 65, or I have 70, or whatever it is. That's the attitude. I'm part of the staff of this church. I am here to help things be fulfilled and move forward. So step 1, have a vision. Step 2, follow a vision. Step 3, you have to have some fight in you. Part of having fight in you is being able to have faith and believe in what God's purpose is for your life. One of the biggest hindrances to our victories and taking part in the blessings of God is our own unbelief. That's one of our biggest hindrances. That can be the toughest thing, is believing what I don't see is what God's desire is for my life. Faith and belief work together. I used the example in the class I'm teaching this past week. What you see, if you take finances, for example, we know what the Bible says about our finances when we're faithful in our giving and we're faithful in our tithing. And you see that here, but you look at your checkbook here and things just don't seem to line up. That's where faith kicks in. You've got to have faith. Faith and belief work together. Kristen and I are no longer in the desert. Thank God, because I didn't want to stay there that long. I don't like the heat. I've even got some gray hair coming in. I think the sun bleached it or something. I don't know. But we had to fight to get out of it. You had to have some fight in you. You got to be a little bit stubborn. And if you know us, you know we are. That doesn't mean that God didn't do the work. God did the work and He gets the credit for it. But we still have got to step. We have got to fight. We can't lay down and let the enemy beat you. You can't dry up in the desert. So we're crossing. We haven't crossed over. We haven't arrived. We're never going to arrive. None of us will ever arrive. But you're crossing over. Don't stay in the desert. And as you cross over, the water will part. I'm going to give you some examples of some people that have some fight in them, and they don't give up. They haven't given up on becoming successful. There's many examples in the Bible, but I want to give you some modern day, some people that we're familiar with. Whether or not they're Christian, I don't know. That's not my point. My point is I want you to hear some of these, and you may have heard some of these before. Bill Gates' first business failed. Albert Einstein didn't speak until he was 4 years old. Jim Carrey used to be homeless. Benjamin Franklin dropped out of school at age 10. Stephen King's first novel was rejected 30 times. Oprah Winfrey gave birth at age 14 and lost her child. Thomas Edison failed 1,000 times before creating the light bulb. How many of us would fail 1,000 times and keep trying? That had to be a little bit discouraging. Franklin Roosevelt became partially paralyzed at age 39. Yet they all became successful. And I bet you, Christian or not, if you sat and you talked to them, I bet you would find out they had a vision. They had someone who they followed that spoke into their life that had a vision. And I guarantee you they had some fight in them. To fail 1,000 times, you had to have some fight and some stubbornness and a not giving up attitude. Jesus himself overcame pain and temptation the same way that we do. He had to fight through. If you follow Stephen's Gate, I want to share something I wrote last week. I wrote a post called Wipe the Dust Off. And I want to share with you a little bit about that. A couple weeks ago, school orientation for ATM. It was on a Thursday, and I was getting all my stuff together, and I went and dug my briefcase out, and it was covered in dust. And, just we were remodeling in the house, and it was just kind of sitting in the corner. I mean, it was filthy. And I went and grabbed it, and I brought it upstairs, and Kristen was there, and Tiffany was there visiting. We joked around, and I laughed. I said, well, it's that desert dust on my briefcase. A lot of dust collected in the desert. But the minute I said that, it's like God began to speak to me about that. And I believe some of you, this word is for you this morning. Some of you need to dig your briefcases out and wipe the desert dust off in it. Things have gotten a little dusty. Maybe you've given up. Maybe you've laid some things down. But it's time to dig out that briefcase again and dust it off. And as I put my books in it, God said, that's your calling. And as I took my Bible and put it in there, He said, that's my promises. So the books represented my calling. The Bible represented the promises of God. Some of you need to dust the briefcase off. You need to pick up your books. You need to pick up your calling. You need to put it back in the briefcase. You need to take God's promises, put it back in the briefcase, pick that thing up, and start running again. Maybe you've been through a desert season. Maybe you're in the middle of it. Part of you crossing over is digging out that briefcase, dusting it off, picking up your calling again. Take inventory of some things that maybe you have laid down that you weren't supposed to lay down yet. Take inventory of those things. God, He's a gracious God. He's merciful. Just because you've laid it down doesn't mean you're done. Just because you gave up doesn't mean you're done. You're not done until you take your last breath. And I believe that's God's word for you this morning. You can pick up what you've laid down. He will restore you where you left off, and it's going to be better. His desire is that your end is better than your beginning. I wrote some things down as I was studying and just thinking about the church and, prophetically speaking. And Pastor had shared last Sunday night, if you were here, he said he was in here praying. And what did he see? All around the church, he saw crutches, he saw wheelchairs. I don't remember everything he mentioned, but, leg braces from people who had been healed. We didn't go down to Acadia and buy some wheelchairs and set them up in here and make it look good. That's part of the vision that you're following. A place of healing. The teaching that you receive in the school of ministry and here is part of preparing for that. The Kingdom Living School that they've started is preparing people to operate in the supernatural. It's preparing people for the future. Because I believe what he saw in a vision last Sunday is closer than you think. I believe it's upon us. I believe there's a time when crutches will be gone. People will come out of wheelchairs. What I saw was just somebody wheeling in, and the minute they hit that door, they just came up on their own. And that I believe what we're going to see, it's going to look different than it did 100 years ago, but it's going to be radical healings. We visited a lot of churches when we were in Georgia. There's a lot of churches in the desert. The Bible Belt. I shouldn't say it. Some people like it down there. It was our desert. Some people it's paradise, but for us it wasn't. But on the level of training and operating in your supernatural gifts, you don't see a lot of that even in the larger churches. So the training that's here to prepare people for the future it's rare and it is unique. And I know we hear that from a lot of traveling ministers, but this is coming from somebody, one of your own. As you go around, it's a unique training. It's rare. You don't see people focused on training up people to be leaders and operating in your supernatural gifts. But what I see as I look out into this crowd and people that aren't even here, I see a group of people that are strong and that are called to take the land. I see people that have a vision, that want to follow a vision, and that have got some fight in them in order to cross over. They joke with me at work and they say, you guys from the north, you Yankees are a little bit uptight. And we just have a different approach sometimes than they do. Our approach is a little different. But we've got some fight in us. Some of you grew up that way, This area is known not to be economically depressed, and you've had to fight through. I believe that's going to change also. But that same, what you were taught growing up to fight through, you need to put that into your spiritual life. There's some things you need to fight through. You may not feel like you're called to take the land, but what I'm speaking to you is based on supernatural vision, not what you see in the natural. I see a well in the midst of a desert. Not necessarily physical desert, but the desert places of people's lives. They can come and there's a well here that'll bring water into the desert places of their lives. There are some giants in the land. I don't care where you go. There's giants in the land. There's some strongholds over this area. Drugs and alcohol are running rampant in Maine, Aroostook County, Fort Fairfield. It's bad. All you got to do is talk to a few people and you'll see it's bad. But I believe those giants, as the church rises up and says, I've got a vision, I'm going to follow a vision, and I've got some fight in me, the giants will flee. I believe that there is a wind of revival and awakening that is beginning to sweep this nation. And I believe it's a word awakening. I believe it's a revival of the word, of right understanding. And as the church gets right understanding and interpretation of the word, that's when revival will break forth. As we step out, revival requires us to apply. We have to step out. And prayer is important in revival. Everything that's part of revival is important, but the most important part is us stepping out. Revival won't take place until we get out and say, I'm going to do what I'm called to do. I'm going to help fulfill a vision. I'm determined to cross on dry land. I see a reorganizing, a shifting. Pastor mentioned a tweaking and an adjusting. And the best way the Lord showed me to kind of explain this to you, because I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but in my job that I do, I have computer software that does a bulk of my work for me. It'll spit out the material you need to build an entire house from the ground up, the nuts, the bolts, the nails, everything in detail, to the point I can send a list to a supplier and they can send me everything we need to build that house. But that material is only as good, that software is only as good as the information and only as accurate as the information I put into it. And there's times it's not 100% accurate. I have to tweak and adjust. I have to be able to look at a set of plans and look at what it's giving me and say, well, that's close, but based on this, this, and this, I need to tweak some things. I need to adjust some things to make this 100% accurate, so when they go to build that house, my phone isn't screaming because they don't have what they need. Sometimes I have to call the person that designed the house and say, hey, this isn't going to work. I called one guy once. I said, your steps are going onto your roof if you build them that way. It's not going to work. You have to be able to look and tweak and adjust. And that's the best way I can explain what I see happening spiritually. You have a master plan, but with every plan, there's tweaking, there's adjusting. As you operate as an estimator to send the things that are needed to build the home, there's tweaking, there's adjusting, and sometimes you may have to say, well, let's redesign this part a little bit so it works better. And that's what I see, and I can't explain it. When I sat in the orientation, I sat there and I said, there's something, I can't put a finger on it, but there's something different. There's a new element to that training, and I can't explain it. I wish I could, but I can't put a finger on it. There is something different that's bringing it and its people to a different level. It's more than just a school. It's preparing for battle. It's preparing to cross over. It's preparing to take the land. It's preparing to drive the giants. So how do you cross over? You have to have a vision, you have to follow a vision, and you have to fight. I want to share with you, some of you may have read this. Andy Sanders, there was a word that went out in the Elijah list on September 3rd. This word went out after I had already put this sermon together. Kristen sent it to me yesterday and said, hey, you might want to look at this. I want to read this to you. Listen closely. The title of it is This Fall, Bridges of Most Unusual Connections Are Starting. And he writes this, aerial views, you've heard of them before. Most of us have seen them ourselves. A short time ago, while walking into the kitchen area of our home, I went directly into an aerial view vision of the northeastern part of the United States. Then the picture changed from an overview of the Northeast as the distance between the earth and me became shorter and shorter, and earth was now right before my face. As I zoomed through the clouds and could now view of the surface of the earth, I noticed that there were little canopies of lights that looked like candles beneath soft white veils, moving rather quickly all over the northeast region on wooden bridges going in every direction. I was able to see from the northeast down into Florida and then all over parts of the country. The light canopies were essentially Christians moving all over the land by means of sturdy wooden bridges. While perceiving this, I realized that this wasn't just another aerial view. It was a bold declaration of what we are about to walk into within the U.S. and other countries this fall. What is this phenomenon? Simple. Extremely unusual but divinely appointed connections, doors and paths with people we wouldn't ever think would happen. They are peculiar pathways that bring about God-changing moments into our everyday lives. As the lights moved from one part of the bridge to the other side, it appeared that the wooden bridges had been created solely for the divine connections for that sovereign moment. God overwrote any obstacles that Satan could throw at the believer's path by using the bridge. What the enemy would hate more than anything on earth right now is for believers to all unite and advance. I'm going to read that again. What the enemy would hate more than anything on earth right now is for believers to all unite and advance. With that type of forward momentum, coupled with the speed and capabilities of digital media, the world and our country could be changed instantly. It isn't a political banner that unites us right now, but the Lord's banner that must fly high above our lives. When His banner unifies us, all other banners rest properly in place and come together as one. A look further revealed that these wooden bridges, all built the same, were different lengths. Some were connecting people from state to state all the way across the country and then to other parts of the world. Other connections stayed right within their communities and states. Beneath these wooden bridges sat many valleys, perilous areas, and dangerous cliffs that overlooked rough, turbulent waters. The bridges were transcendently taking believers from point A to point B, bypassing traps that had been orchestrated by Satan, now deposed by the Lord. Imagine the impact of a region if only 100 believers took a unified step this fall, moving out on the bridge of unusual connections. The magnitude would be global. If you took just 100 believers and said, we're all going to reach one person per month for the next year, the impact, just 100 people, the impact would be global. The muck that has surrounded your feet, slowing you down, will become solid ground that you will walk up and out of once and for all. The quicksand that you accidentally stepped in will no longer sink your life, but will become a stepping stone into your future. The misunderstood trailer path that you once stepped on that led you into a deep, dark forest of disillusion will become a straight path with the shining light of the Lord penetrating through the dense forest. Bright lights will shine on your path this fall. Believe for spiritual and financial momentum in your life. The recent days were Satan's bait, a futile attempt to get you to speak curses rather than blessings. Speak forth, step on the bridge, plunge into fresh momentum this fall. The one who once feared now leaps in faith, and the doubter now steps in confidence. Almost done. I realize that these were well-constructed walk-across wooden bridges, the kind you see suspended over a steep valley from one trail to the next. They were not for the weak at heart, but for the faith-infused. Many will stumble upon unexpected bridges that appear to be of humble significance, but once they have crossed over, discoveries of hidden treasure with eternal value will emerge. It isn't so much about the value of the earthly possessions that God is bringing with us, although some will discover it. Instead, it is the value of lifelong, divinely appointed relationships or connections. It's like Charles Finney meeting Daniel Nash. The footprints that appeared so minuscule will become the monumental highways of life. When I think of the other side of the bridge, I am quickly reminded of what it is like to be in the presence of Jesus, realizing just how gracious, forgiving, and amazingly good he is. The prostitute we read about in the Bible realized it and couldn't hold back the tears. The other side of the bridge brings us to the pinnacle of God's faithfulness, something I think we too often take for granted. A new depth of spiritual understanding will now be at our feet, right within reach of our horizons. Some of the most unusual connections between people that I believe we have ever observed will actually blend. It is a supernatural chemistry that works beyond the limits of our color, culture, convictions, and DNA. If you were to put some of these individuals who are about to be connected to each other into a room together right now, nobody would guess that they would even talk to each other. Remember, these are connections of most unusual proportions. They are the wealthy finding the solution through the homeless or poor, yet they spend a fortune on seeking prior results. These are the hate groups of our country finding God and then loving those they once despised. They are unique personality types who are being overlooked for the good of the whole, of having the gospel sent forth. Extremely unique groups are coming together to surprise the kingdom and the world. Former spiritual parents will come back around to their spiritual children who had once been hurt or wounded, bringing fixed relationships for good. Mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters who were once unable to speak to each other are getting on these bridges and crossing over to the other side, a territory called forgiveness. Ministries that were once on opposite ends of the spectrum are sovereignly uniting and working together for the first time. Remember, bridges of most unusual proportions are upon us now, and they will bring about some of the most unusual connections we've ever heard of. But seriously, I can't fully write how the word unusual will begin to play out this fall in so many ways. But this is a good unusual. It's as if God decided to save the best for last in 2016. What you thought couldn't or wouldn't be, now will be. Unusual bridges are being placed before you this fall. Step on up, believe, and cross over. Brag on God once you make it to the other side.